Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are really excited to be here tonight in conjunction with the Agnes College Music Department to welcome Marissa R. in conversation with Tracey Laird to celebrate her country, how the women of country music became the success they were never supposed to be. The full and unbridled inside story of the last 20 years of country music through the lens of Maren Morris, Guyton, and Kacey Musgraves, their peers and inspirations, their paths to stardom, and their battles against a deeply embedded boys club, as well as their efforts to transform the genre into a more inclusive place for all, and not just white men in trucker hats. We're delighted to be here with both of you, and I'm going to start out by introducing our interviewer tonight, who's Tracey Laird. Tracey is the Harry L. Corinne Bryant and Cody Beverly Slade Professor of Humanities and Professor of Music at Agnes College. Her interests include intersections between race, media, region, music, and identity, particularly related to Southern U.S. styles and genres. She is co-author of the 4th edition of Bill C. Malone's groundbreaking Country Music USA, which celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2018. Other books include Austin City Limits, A History, Austin City Limits, A Monument to Music, and which is co-authored with Brandon Laird, and Louisiana Hayride, Radio and Roots Music Along the Red River. At Agnes College, her courses include ethnomusicology, popular music, Western music history, and travel-based courses to Navajo Nation and the Sea Islands. She is currently working on a coffee table book for Quattro Press about Dolly Parton. So welcome, Tracey. We're so excited always to get to do stuff with Agnes Scott and, of course, to get to honor your work. And when this book came across my desk, you were the very first person I thought of. So I'm delighted that this works out. And we are really excited to have you here, Marissa. So Marissa is an award-winning journalist who has written about the topic of gender inequality on the country airwaves for outlets like Rolling Stone, NPR, Billboard, Entertainment Weekly, and many more. Moss was the 2018 recipient of the Rolling Stone Chet Flippo Award for Excellence in Country Music Journalism and the 2019 Nashville Scene Best of Nashville Best Music Reporter. She's been a guest on the Today Show, Entertainment Tonight, CBS Morning Show, NPR's Weekend Edition, WPLN, the Pop Literacy Podcast, and many more. So welcome to you. Thank you for celebrating your book with us. We were just talking in the green room about how country music can teach us so much about what's happening in the country. And so we're delighted for folks, even if you are not a huge country music fan, I think you can learn a lot from the 3 women profiled in this book, and also from the 2 women on this stage tonight. So I'm going to get out of the way. I want to encourage folks, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Ask a Question box at the bottom center of the screen, and Tracey will incorporate them if there is time. So again, thank y'all both so much for being here, and welcome to her country.
Thank you, ER. This is a great pleasure for me. And I before I turn the mic over to Marissa with a bunch of questions that from me, but also from those of you who are gathered here, I just want to say a few kind of introductory remarks. So, I mean, not because I enjoyed the book so much, Marissa. I want you to know that, both for what it says and also for the quality of how you say it. So I want to talk to you about the contents of the book, but also, if we have time, about your process as a writer. I also want to say that the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking, oh, I need to be making myself a playlist. I need to be making myself a playlist. So I was very delighted to discover that at the end of the book, there is exactly that playlist of everything. So all the music making that drives the whole narrative. So that's wonderful to dig into the sounds too. For all of you who are here who haven't read the book, I thought I would try to summarize very briefly sort of 3 the cogs that are moving parts of the story, all of which I think speak very much to the historical moment in society that we're in now. And Marissa, if I fall short or leave something out, please jump in by all means. So my 3, one of my 3 is the phenomenon that's been documented and demonstrated of women disappearing from country radio airwaves. So in the 1990s, women were quite prominent. The Chicks, Shania Twain, many others were experiencing phenomenal success. But since the start of the century, the percentage of airplay women have received has steadily plummeted. And as your book helps us understand, not by accident, not by happenstance, not because women weren't making music, it was because of a system of barriers with foundations in sexism and gender bias so deeply ingrained that those experiencing it or perpetuating it sometimes don't even realize that that's what's happening. So there's a cog. And then another cog are the three current musicians and songwriters. ER mentioned them. So it's Kacey Musgraves, Maren Morris, Mickey Guyton are all at the center of the narrative. And they're all people who are pushing country music in new directions. Other musicians come in and out of the story, but these central three illustrate not only the industry dynamics that they came up against, but also how they carved new paths to reach audiences at a time when I think lines are blurring both in terms of media and in terms of genre. Yeah. And then the final cog, and then I'm gonna stop talking because people didn't come here to hear me, but I just want to give people the big picture. The three women and others faced sexism and decided, no, they're not going to play by those rules. But at the same time, in your book, you never let us forget that Mickey Guyton and other Black country artists faced an additional set of hurdles due to racism inherent in the music industry, in its categories, and in our larger society. And yet somehow you leave us in a place of hope, despite everything that I just summarized. So I'd like to talk to you first just about that system. How would you explain the dynamics in the industry, in country radio, its connections to recording? Like, what happened since the turn of this century to see that dramatic plummet in women's presence in country music?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for that introduction and really great summary. And I'm such a fan of your work and scholarship. So I came here to hear you talk too. So thank you for that. But yeah, I mean, it's a very unique kind of little ecosystem. And then it's also very much not at the same time, I guess. But, you know, country music is still attached to country radio as its, you know, bread and butter sort of predictor of success and market share in the mainstream. And while other genres have drifted away to, you know, more to streaming or YouTube or TikTok and, you know, as gates to entry or routes to success, country music is still very attached to radio for, you know, various reasons. And that system of radio since the 90s and that period that you talked about when women were, you know, you could turn on the radio and hear Shania Twain and Reba and Trisha and all that. There was kind of like a set of dominoes that happened that I chart through the book that sort of helped build that system into that kind of like super strong gatekeeping environment that, you know, is so good at keeping women and specifically people of color, women of color out. And, you know, I try to like get this down to like the quickest, least wonky little summary of it all. But in the 90s, at that period, the same time you were hearing those women on the radio, there was this rampant consolidation going on, not just in radio, but also in the music industry as, you know, at large. So you're no longer having local programmers and that kind of thing. You're having a lot of consolidated programming. And you have this very, very tight symbiotic relationship between the programmers and the labels. So it's gotten to the point now where everyone kind of blames each other, but one could not exist at being so good at oppression without the other, I guess. And so you had that consolidation. You had what happened with the Chicks speaking out against the war in 2003. Before that, you had 9/11, obviously, in this drift to very patriotic programming that pushed a lot of those big female ballads off the radio. And then you had, along with all of that, this actual system of programming radio that is automated, that has a baked in element of sexism to it. So women's songs, like when you're programming a playlist, are tagged female. They're, female ballad, female whatever. And that programming is actually, designed to be sexist. And so you have all of this going on in this stew, basically, to get us to where we are now. And it's very, because of the system of Nashville, that, radio needs these big male stars to function, and these big male stars need radio to function. And the festivals need that all to keep happening exactly as it is, to keep going and keep making a lot of money, to be super sexy to their sponsors. And the same type of people, the same straight, cis white men are really exciting to those sponsors. And it's all, it's all working so nicely for everyone to make them a lot of money. Why would you change it? And that's kind of where I pick up, I guess, the strongest in her country, and trying to like untangle all of those things, and take all of them to task individually, I guess.
Yeah, and it's really remarkable because it is such a complex story, and you do a great job of keeping it all of the parts in sight, to see the relationships and the interconnections between those dynamics that you're talking about. I mean, one of the things that comes up is, for example, Maren Morris going around that system with a song like My Church, and it releasing on Spotify and not on country radio. So I'm interested to ask, to what extent do you think the internet media explosion has changed or is changing those industry dynamics? Are they blips, or does this have to make it change?
Yeah, I mean, there's like, as is with a lot of the issues that I think sort of surround this book, there's like the hopeful answer and then the pessimistic answer. And like, I'm not sure which is going to weigh in the scale more yet. On one hand, the, streaming, YouTube, Spotify, all that can be really great tools for artists, someone like Maren Morris, who wants to kind of go around that system, and get her song straight to the fans. I always say that with a caveat that those streaming services should pay artists more, but that's a whole other topic, but I always feel like I need to squeak that in there. But, then it's still, because the country music system, the Nashville system, is so strong. Even when you have those breakthroughs through streaming or TikTok, so many times it ends up falling into that same exact system, whether it's like, I went to there's an event here called Charis, which is all the country radio programmers getting together and talking about the state of radio. And I went to one session where they talked about streaming data and how it would inform their programming choices. And once again, it was like, the radio was programming, and they thought this was sort of a sign of change, programming based on Shazam, what people were Shazamming. And if you're programming based on what people are Shazamming, they're usually Shazamming what's on the radio, or sometimes playlists. So it's all, coming into this like feedback loop, And if you look at some of the breakouts, like if you've heard the Fancy Like song, Fancy Like Applebee's, the Walker Hayes song, which was a big TikTok explosion. A lot of people in town sort of like to hold that up as like, oh, we're, country music is finally embracing TikTok culture. But, he's a straight white man, just like everyone else on the top of the country radio chart. So he might just be coming up and finding success through TikTok, but it's the same kind of person, because we haven't dealt with the rot first. But yeah, on the other hand, it is a really nice, you know, a lot of artists can reach fans going around the system through streaming. And, you know, I don't want to discount that at all. It's really powerful, you know, if you're lucky enough to have broadband. But again, another tangent. But I have a lot of those. But yeah, it is. And I think that's where the hope can come through, is that we do have some ways for people to reach fan bases and new audiences, and in meaningful ways.
Yeah.
So that does provide some hope.
Well, and I don't think it's a rant at all. It's really what ER was saying about country music being a way to understand sort of larger issues of our society. So I appreciate those connections. And I think, you know, at what point would whatever internet is doing to push against those boundaries of, you know, people who are other than straight white men, to become able to make country music without it seeming like an anomaly, or, you know, how much has to happen to change kind of the mind, the what do they call it? The gestalt of what a country musician looks like, so that when someone, you know, doesn't fit those parameters, it's just not such a talking point, or, you know, even something. Anyway, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Okay, so the dynamics. I'd also like to ask you about our three central artists in the narrative. They all come from Texas originally. And so that's something that was interesting, or I wanted to talk to you about. Do you think that's a coincidence? Is that something more? Why Texas?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating to me. And when I was thinking about the ways that I wanted to shape this story, you know, there's so many different ways you could write a book on women in country music. And hopefully there'll be more that do it in other different ways in the future. But I found, you know, for kind of narrative ease, to focus on the Texas to Nashville path helped me kind of hone in on my story. My dad lived in Texas for a bunch of years, and I spent summers there. So I have this fascination and connection to it. And there is just like, I wanted to explore that. I've always been like, what is it? You know, what is in the water in Texas? Like, I was pretty fascinated by it, because not only do you have Kacey, Maren, Mickey, you have Miranda Lambert, you have the Chicks. I mean, you have Beyonce and Lizzo, you know, if you want to get more broad looking at it. Guy Clark, you know, just all of, you know, so many of my favorite artists come from Texas. It's kind of enchanting. And so I thought it would be a really interesting way to kind of break down the story. And also to be able to say, when I wanted to look, take a kind of microscope on the issues that are facing specifically Black women in country music, to be able to say Maren, and Kacey all came from the same state, the relative same, geographic radius of a couple hours here or there, all came to Nashville around the same time, around 2011, 2012, and how different their paths are. Even, not just the barriers for women, but the barriers for a Black woman, given all these other sort of variables being the same. What was different for Mickey? And that was, I thought, an important thing to kind of continually highlight and underscore as I, went through.
Well, and I really do appreciate the way that that you do. I said you continually, you won't let us forget that. And I think that sometimes when you're talking about a book about women's experiences, it does get buried, the distinctions. I also, so what happens with Mickey, with Maren, and with Kacey in the story is we see them finding an ability to move a path around the barriers they meet at every turn. And so would you say, do these three artists share something, and the other ones who come up in the mix? Do they share? Is there something that you could say, this is the quality that accounts for them being able to do that? Or is each story, sort of its own unique set of circumstances? What's that?
Yeah.
Word?
I mean, they're very unique in terms of their, kind of overall path and standing within the kind of country music ecosystem. Kacey doesn't get any country radio airplay, yet she's, kind of beloved outside of country music, won album of the year. She's, a global superstar now without any need for anything from the country music community at this point. Maren is really fascinating to me because she is the only one of the three that gets any country radio airplay, and still manages to not censor herself in terms of what she feels is important to speak out about. And also has this foot in kind of the Americana world with the High Women, her group with Brandi Carlile and Amanda Shires and Natalie Hemby. So she's in like a couple different spaces at once, which is, so interesting to me. I just find her to be really groundbreaking and fascinating. And Mickey is kind of, on paper, like has the most sort of mainstream country credentials that you would kind of hope and dream.
Yeah.
What's that?
And her
yeah.
sound
She is, should sit on a country radio playlist next to, all the Lukes and the Jasons and the Carrie Underwoods. Sonically fits right in there, really great pop country, incredible vocals, incredible voice. And, from Texas, open about her faith, all the things that you would, that kind of fit our, what we envision for someone that exists within that space with, the kind of glaring difference of being a Black woman. And, you shouldn't have to listen, we don't listen with our eyes, but clearly country music does. So they all are, really trailblazers in their own way. And I wanted to point that out, rather like kind of point out those differences in all these different paths that you can kind of be radical within this system. I think sometimes when we tell a story of women or, a group of marginalized people, we kind of lump them all together, stick them all in this, bit of clay and like, here's the story. But they're all really different and deserve their own unique, dedicated storytelling. And that was what I wanted to like make a lot of space for, was just their stories, and how they fell in love with music, and their, not just their struggles, but their triumphs and their, moments in the studio or songwriting and, all those great things that we dedicate a lot of space to. And we, have 800 books on Bob Dylan or whatever, who I love obviously. But, there's a lot more than just the struggle too. And we deserve to hear about that.
Yeah. I want to say to those of you who are gathered here, if you have questions, by all means, put them in the ask a question area and we'll hope to get to them. But, kind of on the same topic of this group of stories about these women gathered together. I remember the first time you mentioned the song Suffragettes, and I remember how stirred up I felt the first time I saw, I can't remember actually the title of the video, but it was a video where they're marching down the road, and just I felt so stirred by that, and I don't know, surprised the relationships of support and mutual encouragement that seemed to embody. I felt similarly stirred up reading your book, where it just seemed like there were so many moments of these women who were not doing what is kind of the stereotypical culture that I understand happens with, in the industry, of women being pitted against women. And I wonder, you're in Nashville and you're hanging out in these spaces with these musicians. And do you feel like that's a lasting kind of change that is this a movement that's going to continue to have this momentum and this love and encouragement? Do you see that happening?
Yeah. I mean, I see, I always love what I think Allison Russell, the great artist Allison Russell calls it the Rainbow Coalition.
Yeah.
And I love that. And it just, you do really see it, in the artists that are working now and not just women, there's this amazing organization called Black Opry that is, a touring review of Black country artists that is just creating this. It's just all these other universes outside of the system of Music Row. Mm-hmm. Communities of women and non-binary artists and queer artists coming together to make space, and create space even rather, demand finally space. And that, and even, to give credit to like someone like Jason Isbell, who is, putting his foot out there to be an ally and turn over the stage when he can. And that's important too, because, you need allies, and that is very hopeful and exciting. It's not turning country radio, and I don't know if it ever will.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's being pessimistic as much as just being practical, but it is really nice to see that. And, kind of to the spirit of like a Lilith Fair, like figuring, showing that people don't have to necessarily compete and pushing against those, sort of forces that have been, that surround us to make us think that we do. But I did also kind of wanted to acknowledge that I think there's a lot of kind of false pressure in that, like, all women have to kind of band arms and do this together. And one, I think there is this competition that exists because of the patriarchy that we all exist in. We're, it's sort of designed to make us compete with each other. Mm-hmm. But I think it does I think other people feel like it takes the responsibility off of them if it's like, oh, it's just the women doing the work, so we don't have to, we'll just let them handle it. Yeah. I don't want, shouldn't get away with that either.
Yeah. I mean, at one point you talk about it's not a main point of focus, but about the potentially problematic nature of marketing women's music. I think hyper categorizing is the word that you use. And I think that's fraught, right? Because on the one hand, it can be powerful. And on the other hand, if you put it in its own box off to the side, then does it ever just disrupt the center of the narrative?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. I struggle with that too, because, there's so many things that can be true all at once when you're talking about that. Like, we do, like a friend of mine, her name is Karen Rose. She just wrote a great book called Why Patti Smith Matters. She shared a picture on Twitter earlier today that was a t-shirt that she found that was just like, it was supposed to be one of those t-shirts. I think it was like, Stevie and Patty and Aretha, or I can't remember what the names were, but it's just like a group of random women like put on a t-shirt, like, it's like a random assortment of women in music, not even like a specific genre. And that kind of says a lot too. It's like, we just, a lot of times we'll just sort of put women in music together with no real connections, just sort of like in this, sometimes I think in order to marginalize them. But then at the same time, you have something going on that's like, Women Who Rock, the 4-part documentary series that was, women telling our own stories in women's own voices and sort of correcting this whole narrative that exists. That's been sort of programmed entirely by men. And that work is so important too. So it's not, it's not as simple as saying, oh, don't categorize women into only women. Because sometimes that's really important to talk about women's stories and what you don't ever want to take away what women mean to other women. And women's rights to tell women's own stories, tell our own stories. And but yeah, you also can't just like throw a random group of women together and be like, we did it. Like
we fixed the patriarchy.
Yeah, we did it with this t-shirt that has like women that have nothing to do with each other, or this playlist that's just like women in music.
No.
Is that like, if you do that, then you have to, you get to check that box off, and you'll check it off less, if you just have like your women group and then like, all the men in music, like, so yeah, but it's definitely like, there's a lot of nuance around that conversation. I think it's not one way or the other.
Well, thank you. I could talk about this all day. But I also wanted to have at least a moment to talk about the project and about you as a writer, and to just hear your reflections on, where did you start? How did you come to see this as a story that had a long form? How did you see all the interconnecting parts begin to take shape? And maybe this is, and why now? Like, why is this an important story to tell right now?
Yeah. I mean, I've been in Nashville for a little over a decade, and I've been reporting on, gender inequality and sort of political intersections with country music, and just writing features about artists that I love and am interested in. And in some ways it's, was one of those things for a little bit that I didn't quite see, because I think it was so, it was too close in front of my face that I couldn't quite see that there needed to be this book. At least I thought so. And something clicked, I was talking to my agent, and it felt, we don't always spend a lot of time like sort of dealing in immediate history in music. And it felt really important to keep it really grounded in right now, because, if you look back at this past 20 years, you'll see one very specific thing when you look at the Billboard charts. And often that's, I don't have to tell you a lot of what we look at to sort of determine, ways we talk about a genre and what was popular. And there's this whole other story outside of those charts that I really wanted to preserve and tell. And it felt really important not to, we talk about, Reba and Trisha and Dolly, and they get a lot of love. Well, maybe Trisha doesn't get enough love. She should get more love. Loretta, that generation, Shania, but we don't talk as much about what happened in the sort of next generation of women after them, probably due in part to the fact that we're, right there, living it. But it felt important to preserve that. And, kind of, I was, thinking like, how would we look back on this period? And like, how would people look back in 20, 30 years to understand this very interesting period in country music history and culture, in a, cultural moment in American history. And I thought kind of focusing on very sort of current, still kind of new, even if in the grand scheme of things, career artists would be the most interesting way to do this, and to keep it very, set in the here and now. But yeah, that's kind of how I came to the book. Yeah.
Okay. This is maybe an unfair question, so you don't have to answer it. But if someone said, okay, it's time for, Her Country, the story continues, and you began to write about like the next. Do you have a sense for something that's going on right now that you would love to connect to everything that you've put down and captured?
Yeah, I mean, I do. And I think I don't want to, it's not a huge spoiler. We all, it's not like a secret what happens in the story. But I don't want to give too much away kind of about the last chapter.
Yeah.
But I will say that I do sort of have a vision of what, I guess her country part 2 would look like. And I think the most exciting thing for me would be to not have me be the keeper of that. That's, Black Opry and Reese Palmer has this show on Apple Country Radio called Color Me Country. And, just the worlds that Mickey is building and, just these other worlds of that Rainbow Coalition, Brandy Carlisle and Allison Russell and everyone on stage at Newport, all of those worlds. That's like the book 2.
Yeah.
And I think if we go in the right direction, it's not written by me. It's written in real time by those artists and those people working to make that change.
Yeah.
And that's what again, what excites me the most, I think.
Well, and they're all relatively young. So if they follow in the footsteps of, I don't know, Loretta and Dolly, then they're going to be at it for a long time. And with the kind of conviction and artistry that they're bringing to what they do, there's really no, it's going to be interesting to watch and listen.
Yeah. It's really exciting, I think, to think about, even just to go back to, Mickey, Maren, and Kacey, like what they'll do over the next 20 years. Yeah. And I think they're the kind of artists where like, I have no idea really. And that's exciting to me. I mean, maybe in country music, you're supposed to want things to stay the same, but I think kind of the sky's the limit with what the 3 of them are capable of, and, different ways they can pivot back. And I would imagine they all 3 at their core love country music so much, and that will always be a part of them. But they're artists, so they'll, I'm sure they'll play too. And I think it'll be really, really interesting to watch.
Well, so I have dominated the conversation with Marissa, and there are other people here. Does anybody have a question that you want to pop into the chat? And so that, consider that encouraging. I do have another question that I'm just interested to chat with you about. I think Americana has kind of come up as a space that maybe, that Kacey can be in that space. But what is that space? So I my own sense is that in the 90s, it was trying to carve something that was not the stadium country, the rise of the superstar. It was trying to keep the focus on storytelling, and but then ideally, so how would you, do you have a take on that right now? Like what is that space now? Is it still its own thing?
Americana it's funny. I always say, like, I could be, Americana Fest is coming up here in Nashville in September. And every time I go, I hear country music there that is more country than anything in the, capital C country music space.
Yeah.
That's where I go, like, to hear country music. You go to Americana. I guess it doesn't, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but in other ways it does make a whole lot of sense. It's just, Brandy Carlisle calls it the island of the misfit toys. And it's like, it's a great, it's kind of, because you'll go to Americana Fest and I'll hear rock and roll, we're starting to integrate more, kind of acknowledge the, blues and soul roots of Americana too, that we need to do more of. And you'll hear that too. And you'll hear so many things at Americana. But you will hear a lot of country music. And so I think for some people, it can be a little hard to get their head around what exactly it is supposed to be. But it has become this, you know, this other world that doesn't need, you know, artists that aren't ever going to break through to country radio can find a home there. And, you know, I know there's sort of some downsides to that, I guess, too, in terms of, I think if you go and you find success in Americana, you can't go back. It's like, you know, once you've gone into Americana, you can't come back to country radio like you have, you know, it's like you know, branded across your forehead permanently.
Yeah.
But again, like streaming, it's, you know, it provides this other world and this other way to be successful. And I think I saw, you know, great artist Miko Marks, like just, you know, had a huge debut in the Americana charts. That would never happen on country radio. It's ridiculous. She should. But that's where she's going to get played. However you want to categorize her music. I'm not a categorizer of music anyway, so I don't really care.
Which is kind of where maybe Americana started, but now it's a category. But anyway, it's trying to be beyond category, but no, yeah. I'm sorry, I interrupted you though.
Yeah, no, it's one of those where it's really interesting, and I know that artists have a different, you know, very different perspective on kind of both sides of the coin. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing some country music at Americana Fest in next month.
All right.
Just kind of, yeah.
Okay, we do have a question. Let's see here. Okay, so here a question comes from our listeners here, our audience. What do you think about the promise of these super groups like the High Women?
I love them. You know, I personally love the High Women, and I think they are you know, it's a really exciting thing, something like the High Women, in terms of bringing different people to the table from different kind of worlds within the country music ecosystem. Like Amanda Shires and Maren Morris don't live in the same, you know, on paper kind of lane. You know, Maren Morris is on country radio. Amanda Shires is, I don't know, Americana, indie rock. I don't know. Again, I'm not very good at categorizing people, but, you know, very different lane. And that's exciting to me to think about, you know, Maren's audience coming to Amanda or Amanda's audience coming to Maren. And those can be, that does really cool stuff around sort of like untangling all these allegiances that we have. And I did want to talk, you know, at the same time, I talked a lot about the High Women at Newport, but I also talked about Our Native Daughters, which is, you know, kind of didn't get as much of the, I guess, like trending topics of the weekend, but they're doing, you know, incredibly important work and reintroducing people to the roots of country music, which is in Black tradition, Black folk tradition. And that is, you know, equally, if not more important than, and I don't want to rank, but I think when we talk about the High Women, I think you need to talk about Our Native Daughters too. Mm-hmm. That's so important. And, you know, hopefully there'll be even more like that, you know, strength in numbers, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. I thought it was a good question, and I'm glad. I appreciate you answering it. So here's another question. How do these issues of gender and race in country music play out on the world country music scene?
I mean, it's hard, you know, it's a big question to tackle. But, you know, a lot of these, I hear from a lot of folks that are, you know, over in the, you know, in England or something like that. And they will say, well, we don't have these same kind of problems that you do. We play Margot Price on our country radio stations, and you know, we play women, we play men. You know, not maybe, I don't know if it's equally, but you do, when you look at other markets, you know, you can untangle some of the kind of systemic problems that we're so attached to in Nashville, but you know, like racism and misogyny isn't uniquely American only. So I think you're still, you know, and it all feeds into each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, stars that are kind of watered and tended to, you know, an American soil have a greater chance, or, you know, a bigger, you know, leg up at reaching audiences overseas. And you know, if that's only Luke's and Jason's and the occasional blonde woman, that's not, you know, we're not going to see the sudden like blossoming, I think, in other countries if we can't lift them up here to the degree that they should be. But I have heard that, you know, it is interesting to look at other countries where country music is popular, and that's a lot of countries, and see, you know, see how the balance skews. And it does show that if you can, you know, get away from the country radio machine here, you know, it's possible to play, you know, God forbid, women's voices on the radio.
Well, and a machine, I don't think you alluded to it, but we haven't spoken it aloud here, I don't think. The 1996 Telecommunications Act was devastating in terms of leaving nuanced spaces in any kind of radio, right? Any kind of terrestrial radio. And so there's possibly things that are going to push against that with non-terrestrial radio.
Yeah. I mean, not only did it change, you know, the amount of stations, who's controlling those amount of stations, the, you know, the centralization of programming, it also had an impact on the diversity of station ownership. I don't have the current numbers but it's, you know, very low in terms of Black owned stations, and that all increased after the Telecom Act. You know, in huge numbers, and in terms of pushing a diversity of ownership out. And in the Trump administration got, you know, even worse. So those are things, you know, why it's always kind of important to bring this conversation in the, you know, kind of broader political context.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's a little bit of like a wonky answer to, like, you know, say, like, let's talk about the FCC when we're talking about, you know, country radio, but it's really, you know, it's all part of the same ecosystem. And yeah.
Okay, we have another question from our audience. And some of my favorite people are asking some of my favorite questions. So this one switches gears about, it's about the Ken Burns documentary. So the question is, what is missing in terms of representing women in country music from Ken Burns documentary about it? Like, what might Lynn Novick or Maren Morris have added to his take? Or no, Marissa Moss is what it says. What would you have added to his take?
Well, no, I mean, I do have to admit, I haven't watched the entire thing. I know, don't tell anybody. But that was a little bit intentional. I just, I didn't want it to kind of cloud too much where my brain was, because kind of writing about similar genre, obviously. But I know that he did stop with Garth Brooks. And I'm not sure why. That seems to be maybe leaving out a lot. There's like this tendency to discount the influence, I think, even of like what came right after Garth, not to mention leading up to present day, in terms of what they bring to country music. And they're not like, you know, we get a little bit snobbish, I think, in terms of like playing up the, you know, Merle and Willie and Waylon, and tend to leave out a lot of women's voices in that because maybe we think they're too popish or whatever. And that seems like it would have been a good component to the story. But yeah, I should probably watch the whole series now that I've
free to now.
Look out, yeah.
Won't cloud your judgment. But I think you're right. It can be almost a fetishization of kind of there's a way the story gets told. And then it gets told over and over and over again. And it's a fine and fun story. It just doesn't leave room for the people who it doesn't leave room for, which is a lot. So
yeah.
So so thank you for that. Are there any other questions from our gathering? And is there anything else that you feel like, well, we've covered all of these bases except for this one really important corner of the book that Tracey, you just didn't bring up?
No, I mean, you asked so many great questions. And I mean, I think the thing that I just want, the thing that's like kind of most on my mind, especially, you know, where a lot of folks on this call, Zoom, internet thing with us right now from, you know, quote, red states, although not counting you now, Georgia, whatever, that, you know, means for the futures. But I think it's you know, I'm really fascinated with talking about kind of the ways that we look at country music and country people and how that crosses over with the ways that we look at people from red states or the South and the assumptions that we make. I think you can learn a lot by looking at both together. And I think we make a lot of the same lazy judgments about both. I mean, you just look, you know, it's not the South, but you look at Kansas and what happened recently over there with, and, you know, I think a lot of people are often surprised by the people that exist in red states or Southern states. And I think, you know, that's something I wanted people to leave with when they close the book, is that, you know, to think about those things, especially, you know, in terms of not wanting to dismiss, you know, entire states and groups of people because of the decisions of a very small group of white men, you know, making decisions for us, whether it's politically or, you know, in what music we get to listen to. So that was just a word vomit of things that are on my mind these days.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think that we all, no matter, provinciality is something that everybody can have, no matter where you're from, and that includes making assumptions about people who aren't from where you're from, or where, you know. And the minute you go there, but this is part of, you touch on this in the afterward. I mean, the minute you go there, when you move from one place to another, you realize that, oh, people are people. Mm-hmm. And they, you know, every single one of them is complex and interesting. I need to apologize to Leanne, our question asker, because you know, when I saw, because your name is Marissa Moss, and I saw the double M's, and I have bifocals, and I saw Maren Morris. Anyway, so I totally messed up the question. But let me emphasize that it was a question, and I think calling Ken Burns the next time he does a documentary needs to expand the voices of people pontificating, and that's, of course, that's a criticism, that you know, when you have a media format that's this long, you have to make decisions. But I think having your voice, and that was the point of the question, having your voice, having more voices of women, and this gets back to the boardrooms, right? So the country radio, the record company boardrooms, having more people in those rooms making those decisions are the only way that those things are going to change, unless the streams of revenue and money start happening in other places, and then, you know, that's also going to force hands. I don't know. So there's me word vomiting.
Yeah. And I mean, and not to, obviously Ken Burns does.
Amazing work, right?
You know, like amazing work, but, you know, at some point, maybe we can think about if and how long it's necessary to look to only white men as sort of the, like, the only catalogers of every major cultural or historical or artistic moment in our history. Doesn't need to be, it does, the definitive work does not need to be only from a white man.
Yeah.
You know, that is maybe something, you know, not trying to say, you know, put Ken Burns out of a job or anything, but I'm just saying in terms of what we view as the definitive, you know, what happens when we let the definitive story of country music be told by a white man?
Yeah. Why do we even think it possibly could be the definitive story?
Right.
Oh.
And, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right. Well, it's about time. Oh, okay. We have one more, not a question, but a comment to you, Marissa. One thing that doesn't get mentioned in review of your excellent book is that you do tell the story of women who work in the industry outside of artistry. And I think this is an important feature of your work. And this comes from an important voice of Dr. Jada Watson, who is on it. Hi, Jada. And
Hi,
so
Jada.
That's quite an important and wonderful observation coming from somebody who knows. So,
Jada is, this book would not have been possible without the work of Dr. Jada Watson. Because without it, we are, you know, kind of talking in obscurities. And, you know, it's so crucial to have that, to be able to point to actual data about how, you know, you can say like, oh, it's really bad. But when you can say, no, it's 10% when it comes to women, or it's like 0.01% when it comes to Black women, or what, you know, whatever kind of absolutely dismal numbers.
Yeah.
But yeah, to include, you know, not just Jada's work, but you know, women like Jada, women like Tracy Gershon, and you know, people, you know, kind of behind the scenes, not just the artists that we know, and not even just the songwriters, but the women that work in Nashville, the people that work in Nashville, even like, you know, Hunter Kelly, who has a great show. And I keep, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm like you know, propping up Apple Radio, like I'm sponsored by it or something, but I'm absolutely not. They just have a lot of great country music shows, not sponsored by Apple Radio, Apple Country. Hunter Kelly has a great show called Proud Radio there, and boosting queer artists in country. And he comes into the book too. And, you know, just those people that, you know, aren't the ones on stage singing, but are really working to make change from inside. Thanks.
Well, and in the case of Hunter Kelly and some of the other people who do these wonderful podcasts, they're, you know, warm-blooded human beings with brains who are putting together music that's curated and thoughtfully presented, not a computer generating the program. And that makes a huge difference. So,
yeah.
Well, I think our time is coming to a close. And so I want to thank everybody who's here and bring back ER, who's going to tell you how to buy. Marissa, I've obviously read this book, and I can say it's wonderful. It's a wonderful work, and ER is going to tell you how you can buy it and support.
Yes, thank you so much.
Tracey.
So we'll encourage folks to just click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen, and that will take you directly to the link to buy Her Country from Charis. It really does help us when you buy your books directly from us. So thank you to everyone who chooses to do that. You can also request it from your local library. That helps. It also is great to recommend it for your academic library at your institution. If you are an academic or a music scholar, that would be awesome to get this into your institutional library. as always, if you enjoyed tonight's event and you want to support Charis Circle, our nonprofit, you can do that by making a donation. That helps us put on programs like this in this platform. And we hope that you'll just come to Charis, both in person or virtually. Thank you, everyone. Marissa, thank you so much. And we wish you continued success in all your endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great. I'm really honored to have been able to do this and talk with you, Tracey. And yeah, you have books available for purchase too. So, you know, if you want to pick up a couple books on country music, don't just stop at Her Country.
That's right. That's right. And Tracey's books are on our Agnes Scott Professor shelf in the store. So you can hop on in and get them if you live locally. So again, thank you both. Have a great night and stay safe.
Marissa. Thank you, ER.
Have a good one. Thank you.